Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Marvel Cinematic Universe Risk from Hasbro and USAopoly and unnamed designers, because why name designers? I mean, honestly, they don't need the credit after all. In any event, now, I don't want to make a habit of reviewing every Risk re-theme that comes out. I know I've done a few of them, like Mass Effect, Plants vs. Zombies, and Risk Legacy. Well, I haven't actually reviewed Risk Legacy yet, but we've played it on the channel. But I always look for ones that are interesting, that take the Risk idea and then retheme it out into something new and different, which has led to some pretty interesting games. Like, I actually think Plants vs. Zombie was a good version of Risk, as was Risk Legacy. Mass Effect didn't work quite well for me, but I read up on Cinematic Universe, Marvel Cinematic Universe Risk. They need a better name for that. And it seems pretty interesting, as well as the fact that there are two games in this box. There is the Risk half, which is called specifically the Battle for Manhattan, which has all the different characters from the Marvel movies trying to battle for Manhattan, which doesn't make a lot of thematic sense if you are familiar with the movies, but just roll with it. And there's a lot of different things going on there, hidden, not hidden objectives, but objectives that you have to complete in order to win the game, and so on and so forth. I'll go over that in the overview. The other half of this box is a Guardians of the Galaxy dice game. They refer to it as a card game, but it's more of a dice game. In fact, what I was surprised to learn, which I didn't know ahead of time because, of course, they don't name the designers or tell you anything about the game, when I actually played it, I'm like, this seems really familiar. What it is a retheming of the game Age of War from Reiner Knizia, which is itself a retheming of, wait for it, Risk Express, a dice game which was never released over here in the US, which was all about rolling dice and conquering territory, same as Age of War. In this version, Guardians of the Galaxy, you're just trying to get asset cards that are still frames of the movie, essentially. Let me go ahead and show you how the game works, how both games work. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Alright, let me run you through Marvel Cinematic Universe Risk. Now, there's actually two games in the box. I'm going to cover the actual Risk part of that first, which is mostly the same as Risk as far as how you conquer territories and move about the map, but there are some significant differences. So it is worth hanging out to figure out, to see what the major differences are. And as you can tell, there are a lot of different bits. This does not look like Risk necessarily. That's because the game takes place strictly in Manhattan. In fact, you're going through all the different, they're calling them sectors in this game, of Manhattan. And as you can tell, there are different factions on the board. I've set this up for a 5-player game. I should mention that you can play this like normal Risk too. This is called the Battle for Manhattan version of Risk, which really, if you're getting this game, this is the only version you should even bother with. But every player is going to take control of a different faction in the game, which are all the major characters from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Here you have Ultron, you have Thor, you have the Winter Soldier from Captain America, the Winter Soldier, you have Captain America, and you have Iron Man over here. And they have a lot of different bits and pieces that come with them. They all have their own stack of units, which are on the board. They all have like a figure representing themselves, which counts as 3 units in true Risk fashion. And then they have a little Avengers symbol of their color, which is just a single unit. They also each have allies that they can bring out during the course of the game. So here's the Vision, and you have War Machine, and here is Hawkeye. These are Iron Man's compatriots. Whereas if you look over at Captain America, eventually, he has people like Black Widow and Nick Fury and Falcon, basically the S.H.I.E.L.D. officers. And so on and so forth. Everyone's going to have their own people, like the Winter Soldier has Hydra agents, the ones from the movie that betrayed S.H.I.E.L.D., and so on. Now, the reason for this is because every faction in this game has their own winning objective. It's not like in other games of Risk where it's just world domination. Rather, everyone has a couple of different things that they're trying to do out on the map, and if they meet those goals, they're going to automatically win the game. So, for instance, you may have noticed this as I was scanning about. there is a big helicarrier piece. This is the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier from the movies. You actually have to construct it. It's not that complicated at all, so it's not that sturdy. So you basically just set it up and leave it off to the side, and there's absolutely no good reason why it's up in the air, but there it is. It's just for effect. These are actually sectors of the game. You can conquer these like other territories in any kind of game of Risk, and there's actually S.H.I.E.L.D. agents as like neutral force that stays there on those different sectors. Now, the catch is, at the front of the helicarrier, there's a little, what are those, Quinjets? Yeah, it's like a Quinjet symbol. And out on the map, there are docking stations that match up to that Quinjet symbol. You can attack the helicarrier starting with Sector 1, which is the Quinjet section of the helicarrier, from those spots on the map as if you were attacking to an adjacent spot. So, the reason I'm explaining this to you right this second is that Captain America's secret objective is to conquer the entire helicarrier and 5 different docking sectors out on the board. So if he can have his units take over all of the helicarrier and then 5 of the, I believe, 9 docking sectors out on the board, actually control those territories, he is going to win the game immediately. Now, Ultron, who is this happy-looking gentleman over here, his objective is to first control Sokovia, which you may remember from Age of Ultron if you've watched that. I assume that you have, since you're absolutely a huge nerd if you're watching one of my videos anyways. He has to control this sector of Sokovia, which it doesn't necessarily look like it, but you see those like little blue glow liney thingies? Those are signifying that that area, despite the fact that it's Manhattan, is connected to Sokovia. So you can attack from there, or you can attack from Asgard, which is this other part over here. Yes, I know, it's a bit weird. I'm sorry, I didn't actually make this totally clear. If you control the helicarrier, I'll go ahead and explain this now, you can actually attack any area on the board that has one of the docking stations, by the way. I'm just going back and amending that just to let you know right this second. In any case, yes, Ultron wants to control Sokovia, and if he controls that sector, and, just a little thing called wiping Iron Man off the map, and Iron Man has all these yellow pieces, then he will win the game. As soon as he doesn't have to be the one to kill every single one of Iron Man's units, but as soon as that condition is met and he controls Sokovia, he wins the game. Now, speaking of Iron Man, we'll cover him next. He wants to control Malibu, which is under Ultron's control at the beginning of the game. By the way, I will mention more about this in my final thoughts, but the pieces for Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and Ultron, when they're on the map, are very, very hard to distinguish. So it's not just my bad camera work. They're really difficult to tell apart. In any event, Iron Man wants to control Malibu, and he wants to do a little mini game over here called constructing the Avengers Tower, which is this thing here. The Avengers Tower consists of... a lot of tricky camera work in this one for some reason. But it consists of 3 parts. There's the 2 pieces of the foundation and the Stark Tower itself, which he wants to build. Now, how he's going to build those are by the resources that are on the board. There's these little tiny blue chips that are scattered around the board. They mean nothing to any of the other players. They only mean something to Iron Man. If Iron Man takes control of a sector that has one of those chips, he gets to take them. And when he gets a certain amount of chips, like it's like 2 or 3 or 4 per piece, he can start building the tower in the central sector here. He can start building Avengers Tower. Once he's built that and he has control of Malibu, he wins the game. Now, the Winter Soldier, who is Bucky, his friends call him Bucky, so I'm allowed to call him that. He has, a lot of these have very similar sounding win conditions. Now, his is that he has to, much like with Ultron, who has to take control of a territory and then eliminate someone, he wants to take control of Washington, D.C., and then he wants to kill Captain America. Kill all of Captain America's units. Again, he must not be the one, he doesn't have to be the one to take out the last unit from Captain America that's on the board. But if that is the case, no matter who did it, and if he has control of Washington, D.C., he immediately wins the game. Finally, there is Thor. Now, I don't know why Thor has his own faction. That's for, the ages to decide. But he does. He's the red pieces on the board. And what his goal is he wants to first control Asgard. And Asgard happens to be populated by a neutral force of dark elves, which are a little bit tougher to take out. They roll d8s instead of d6s. But once he takes control of that, the only other thing he has to do, just a tiny little thing, is find Loki's scepter. Now, there are Loki tokens which is fun to say, spread out all around the board. Most of those Loki tokens look like this on the other side, okay? And they do two things. One is they serve to just confound Thor and confuse him from finding the real scepter. The other thing is that they actually make those areas more difficult to conquer. They let the defender roll, I believe, D8s instead of D6s, except that, and they stay there for the entire game, even if someone conquers it, except if Thor conquers it. If Thor conquers it, he gets to look at it, see if it's the scepter or not, and then toss it, and it will no longer give that area a bonus. But he needs to find the real scepter, and if he finds the real scepter, which looks like this, actually, since you wondered, that's what it looks like on the other side. If he can find that, and if he can take control of Asgard, he will immediately win the game. Oh, and by the way, you were probably wondering what this is. Yes, that is the Hulk. The Hulk does not have his own faction, although, for God's sakes, shouldn't he? But no, he is like this random force that could potentially come out on the map. Every time someone conquers a territory in this game, no matter who does it, they get to move Hulk, who is probably the most detailed figure in this game, when that's not saying much, gets to move up the rage meter. Now, if Hulk ever, this is like puny banner here at the bottom, if Hulk ever gets to the top of the rage meter, whoever's turn it is gains control of the Hulk for that turn. He's going to take the Hulk card, he's going to put the Hulk into a territory where he has at least 2 units, and then he can start rampaging, assuming he still wants to keep attacking. And what this means, mechanically speaking, wherever Hulk is, you get to replace up to 2 of your 6-sided dice with 8-sided dice. I don't know why you wouldn't replace less than 2. Anyways, add 1 to your biggest die roll, and to your highest die roll, and you get to re-roll all 1s so long as Hulk is under your control. Now, I will cover the core mechanisms of Risk, just in case there are people who have not played Risk before, which this happens, it does happen. But I just want to cover some of the newer stuff first, for people who are familiar with Risk but just want to know what's different about this one. So, one of the last things I'll cover is the set of faction cards that every player has. Every player has their own stack of cards, and these actually have 3 different uses. Now, at the start of the game, depending on the number of players, because you can play with less than 5, I wouldn't recommend it though, you are either going to start off front-loaded with 1 or 2 cards, depending on which faction you play as. Oh, and by the way, the game takes place in a very specific order, as a matter of fact, depending on which factions are in play. So that's important as well. But you'll start off with 1 or 2 cards, and then in true Risk fashion, every time you conquer a sector through combat, you'll be able to draw another card from your faction deck. But where it gets different is that every faction card has 3 different potential uses. We'll take a look at a few of Iron Man's here. And you can use them on your turn at any time. So, first off, every card has a special ability. You can just use the special ability when it applies, like this one says play at the start of your turn. Some of them are out of turn as well. You can choose an opponent's ally, roll a 6-sided die on a 4 or more, remove the ally from the board, and return it to that player's reserve. Or slow it down, play it when you declare an invasion. The defending player subtracts 1 from his highest defense die roll for the duration of the invasion. So on and so forth. Just a lot of like combat-related special abilities and things like that, moving units around, and so on. So that's one way you can use the cards. You use them, and they're gone. Alternatively, again, in true Risk fashion, you can turn in cards for more units. When you turn in cards for units, you're going to pay attention to the Avengers symbol on the bottom of the card. Depending on the number of Avengers symbols that you turn in, you are going to get a certain amount of extra troops at the start of your turn, which are part of the base Risk rules, which for people who don't know, I will get to that in a minute. And then the last use you have for the cards are allies. Down in the bottom corners of the cards, you're going to have different allies pictured. Like, for instance, like I mentioned before, Iron Man has Vision, War Machine, and Hawkeye, the extra little pieces that they have off to the side. If you choose to discard a card for your ally, you're going to take the ally piece and put it into one of your territories. Now, allies are very interesting because they can give you bonuses when you're attacking with those units. So, for instance, that's one of Iron Man's allies with Thor, but just use your imagination. Allies might give you a +1. Allies to your attack rolls. They might give you +1 to your defense. They might let you... one of them, like Zola from the Winter Soldier, lets you actually, when you conquer territories, you can take their enemies, like flip them to your side and put them down as units, kind of like Grima Wormtongue in the Lord of the Rings Risk. I'm sorry that I know that. So things like that. Allies can be very, very cool. Now, the thing is, an ally it moves with units, and it must attack with units in order to gain its benefit. Things like that. You have to decide whether or not to use it, and if you use it, it will move together with the rest of your units in combat. However, it cannot live on its own. It's like in an incubator that with the rest of your troops. When the last troop is dead from your sector, the ally goes as well. So something to keep in mind. Oh, and one last thing. Again, I have to keep going back to the Helicarrier because I keep forgetting things about it. But if anyone just takes out the units, the S.H.I.E.L.D. units on the Helicarrier, they're just gone. Except if you're the Winter Soldier. If you're the Winter Soldier, you actually get to flip the token over to its Hydra side, and then they become units that the Winter Soldier gets to use with the rest of his units, which I thought was a pretty cool thematic element. Now, the rest of the game is Risk, I swear. Now, it's a lot of differences, but it genuinely is, because what's going to happen, here's how your turn is going to work. First thing you do is reinforce units, so you're going to count up all the sectors that you have control over, divide that number by 3, rounded down, and you get that many extra units that you get to put out on the board into one of your sectors, always to a minimum of 3. Then, once you've reinforced, and also at this point you can turn in cards for more units and so on, then you get to use your allies. So if you have cards and you want to use them to gain allies, you'll take them, put them down into a sector, and then you get to invade. Now, how invasions work in this game, if you're not familiar with Risk at all, very simply, I'm just going to set up a little mock battle here. And by the way, remember that the big units count as 3. You go with a group of your soldiers. You're going to try to invade an adjacent territory. And remember the rules for the Helicarrier and so on and so forth. You can always attack with 1 to 3 troops, but you must have a minimum of... You must always leave a troop behind. So, for instance, in this case, I want to attack with 6 people. Even if I wanted to attack with a total of 8 with Iron Man, I'd have to make sure I leave 1 behind. So, but you always attack with up to 3 at a time. If I only had 4 people left from here to here, I could attack with 3, but I have to leave 1 behind. I can't just completely abandon a territory like that. Now, the number of troops that you choose to attack with is going to... oh, by the way, for every ally you have, you get to increase your die to a D8 as well, their special ability. Sorry about that. But let's just say this is a normal battle for this case. No allies, no nothing like that. If you're the attacker, as many people as you're choosing to attack with, up to 3, you take that many 6-sided dice. If you're the defender, if you only have 1 person that you're defending with, you can only roll 1 6-sided die. If you have 2, you may roll either 1 or 2 dice. And how this works is very simply, the attacker rolls all their dice, the defender rolls all their dice, and you compare the highest dice to the highest dice. 6 from the attacker versus, in this example, 6 from the attacker, 5 from the defender, 4 and 3. That means, in this case, each side is going to lose 1 and 1. The attacker beats... actually, it's 2 from the defender. So the defender has to lose 2 here. However, if there was a tie, then the defender wins all ties. And when you're the attacker, you can keep going as long as you can or want to. You can break out multiple battles. You can say, okay, I'm attacking here. Okay, I'm done here for better or worse. Now I'm going to attack here. Okay, I can't attack anywhere else, I'm done. Or you can just keep attacking and attacking and attacking as much as you want. When you finally decide that you are done with your invasions for the turn, you have one last opportunity to maneuver. If you maneuver, you get to take any amount of troops, always leaving 1 behind, from one area and move them to another of your areas, sectors that you control, that is either adjacent or connected by a string. So, for instance, you can't have enemy units cutting off your attack. So let's say that Iron Man trying to reinforce back to here. I could do that with as many units as I wanted to, or I could go up to here because I happen to own that as well, but I could not reinforce down to this sector because I'm cut off, okay, even though I own that sector. So you have a chance to maneuver, and the last thing you do, if you actually successfully conquer the territory, you get to draw one of your faction cards, hold on to it, use it for whichever of the 3 different uses that you want. So that is a really quick and dirty rundown of Risk Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's got the standard Risk combat rules and how you go from turn to turn, but you have not secret objectives, but normal objectives, open objectives that you yourself and your faction are trying to meet in order to win the game and stop the other players. Now, let's talk about the other side of the game board in a completely different game in the same box. Okay, here is the other game that is in the box. It is the Guardians of the Galaxy dice game, for lack of a better word. I don't think that's the official term for it, but whatever it is. Now, this is actually the other side of the Risk board, and as a matter of fact, these are they're the asset cards out on the board. These are actually, ta-da, the other sides of the faction cards from the Risk side of the board. So you'll reuse those, flip them over, put them out on the board just like so. And then new components to this game are these Galaxy of the Guardians cards, which you're going to have a certain set of them for each of those assets cards, and you're going to put them in the applicable spots next to them. So, for instance, down here, and these are all from the movie, you have the Dark Aster Kree warship, which has the characters associated with that asset in the movie. You have Nebula, Ronan the Accuser, and Korath. And, of course, up here in the top, you have the Guardians ship, and with all the Guardians of the Galaxy. You have Drax, Groot, Star-Lord, Rocket, and Gamora. You have the Ravagers here on Morag. You've got the prison and the different parts that they had to assemble together in order to stage their escape. So there's not a lot of theme to this side of the board, but technically speaking, you're grabbing all the stuff from the movie and putting it all together, and that's you going through the movie of the Guardians of the Galaxy. So you'll put all that out. The only other component that you need are the dice. You're going to use all the dice except for 2 of the D8s that were from the Risk side of the board. You'll never need more than that. Now, the goal of the game here is to have the most points by the end of the game, and the end of the game is going to occur when the last of the asset cards have been taken. That is what you're trying to accomplish here. Each of the individual cards that constitute the assets has a point value on them, like for here you got 2, 1, and 1 points. But if you can manage to nab all the cards associated with the asset, you then get to claim the asset card itself. Once you've claimed the asset card, no one can steal any of the individual cards from you anymore. You've locked it down. And also, any of the points you get from the cards are replaced by the bigger number on the asset card. So, for instance, if you only had 2 of the cards for the kill in prison, you'd only have either 4 or 3 points, or potentially 5 points. But if you can grab all 3 of them, they turn into 8 points. So your asset card replaces all the cards you took before it, and no one can mess with them after that. On top of which, the asset card is going to give you a special ability. So Kill in Prison says that if you control Kill, every other set you control gives you +2 victory points. Then you have Morag. Morag actually has a very interesting ability, which is that when someone takes it for the first time, they'll take the asset card. They also get this orb token, which, if you've watched the movie, spoiler alert, is like the Infinity Stone or something like that. So you get to take that orb token together with you. Now, at the end of the game, that's going to be worth +3 victory points for you, which can be a pretty big swing. But also, if during the course of the game, if someone wants to steal that from you, then they can try to steal one of your cards and then roll the dice again and try to get 3 of a kind, and then they'll be able to take the orb as well. But that's a bit random. And all the different asset cards have different special abilities, like letting you roll the dice over or adding 1 to the dice, and so on and so forth. Rerolls. That's pretty much what you're aiming to do in the game. Now, how do you actually get the cards that constitute those assets? Very simply, when it's your turn, you're going to take all 7 of the dice, you're going to roll the dice, see what you have, and then look out at the board at any of the cards that have not been taken yet, or your opponent's cards. You can try and steal if they haven't gotten the asset for them yet. And you're going to try to match up dice. So, for instance, let's say that I wanted to go for Korath here. And these are the dice that I rolled. I get to look at the dice first and then decide where I want to put them. But actually, a better example for now would be Ronan the Accuser. Let's start with him. So, Ronan has these sets of numbers down here. First off, the number up in the top box, you only have to worry about that number if you're trying to steal a card. If you're trying to steal a card from an opponent, you must match that number as well. If not, you only have to worry about what's in the box down at the bottom. If a number is by itself, after you've rolled your dice, you very simply have to match up one of your dice to that number. So I could say, all right, well, I need a 4. Boom. There's my 4. I could say, oh, this one down here requires 2 numbers. That means I need to have 2 dice of exactly that amount. So it's like, okay, here's my 6. And here's my 5. Now, every time that I match a row, I re-roll the rest of the dice and continue trying to match. If I ever fail in matching a row on one of my dice rolls, I have to dump one of my dice and then keep rolling whatever is left until I can meet it. Which in this case, boom, I got the 8 that I needed. Now I get to take that card. But if I keep failing, I keep losing dice until it's physically impossible for me to actually get that card anymore. Now, it's also possible, and this is why I want to cover Korath second, is that you'll have a box with these 1, 2, and 3 dice symbols on it. What this means is that you have to not meet by exact count the number that is in the box, but you have to get to that number by having 1s, 2s, and 3s. In other words, I could have any number of dice that have 1, 2, or 3 on them, including the D8s, so long as the number is at least whatever that is here, which in this case is 7. So any number of 1s, 2s, and 3s, exactly 1s, 2s, or 3s, that add up to or exceed 7. So that's how the dice matching works in this game. And that's very simply what you're trying to do. You roll the dice, select a card to go after, try to match up those the symbols and lines on the card until you no longer can do it anymore because you've either grabbed the card already and then you move on to the next player's turn, or you've failed, you've run out of dice and chances and options to get the card, and then it moves on to the next player, they roll the dice, and they keep doing that. You keep going around and around and around like this. By the way, this is supposed to be the staging area where you'll actually take the card, put it here, and add up all the dice. It's kind of unnecessary. Don't worry about it. But that's what the game is. You're going to keep grabbing cards, trying to get a whole set of cards so you get the asset and lock them down. Other players can steal your cards. You may be able to get the orb, and the orb can bounce back and forth. But regardless, at the end of the game, when the last of the asset cards is taken, then you're going to add up all of your points, the points that you get from your main asset card, any lingering cards that that wouldn't technically happen, but any points that you get from your assets, if anyone who has the orb gets bonus points, so on and so forth. Whoever has the most points at the end of the game is the winner of the game. Now, that is both the games in the Risk Marvel Cinematic Universe box. Let's get to my final thoughts. All right, a lot of interesting things to unpack here. I'm not quite sure where to start. But let's talk about Guardians of the Galaxy, the dice game, or whatever its official name is, first. Because that one took me by surprise. I was not expecting it to be a retheme of Age of War and also Risk Express, which I think is how they got away with that. If I was going to guess, I think because it was involved with the Risk franchise at some point originally, they were allowed to reuse that for this game. If not, if it's just a total ripoff, then that's a shame. I don't know what can be done about that, but I think they were actually allowed to retheme the game like this. The thing is, I have reviewed Age of War on my channel before, and I was not a fan. I felt it to be a very dull and repetitive dice game that was essentially themeless. And I mainly think that about this one as well. I will say, however, that if you, like me, were not a fan of Age of War or Risk Express, which I never played, at least they make the change here that you get special powers. You take one of those asset cards, you get a special power. You have the whole thing with the orb, which can be bouncing around, and that's interesting. That's way more than, even though it's not much, it's way more than was actually in Age of War. And yes, you're looking at still frames of the movie Guardians of the Galaxy, although surprisingly well done. Like most still frames, like for instance the dreadful Star Trek 5-year mission, they use stills from the show, and they look terrible and muddy. Maybe because it's a newer movie, they got better shots of it, and it looks better. But the theme is still not there, I guess. I mean, I think you could say, like, all right, let's reenact the prison movie. Let's get those prison cards. Okay, nothing like that really happens. So ultimately, I feel the same way I felt about Age of War. It functions, it works, it's easy to understand, it's easy to learn. People can jump right into it, and it looks okay, but there's just nothing there. It's a very simple, totally random, repetitive game, and nothing to write home about. So we'll stop talking about that. Let's talk about the Risk part of this equation, which is the Battle for Manhattan. And yes, you can do normal skirmish, they call it Risk, with this, but do not waste your time with that. That's not what this is about. The Battle for Manhattan is super interesting because it's one of those games that takes the standard formula of Risk. Battling is the same, going to different sectors, trying to take them over is all the same. But now you have the objective-based place. And I know that a lot of Risk rethemes do this, but the only one that I've really played like that, well, I played the Mass Effect, and I think that was the only objective one that I played and reviewed. But also Risk Legacy had it, where if you take, I won't give spoilers, but certain things that you do during the game will give you objective points, where it's like victory points instead of trying to get world domination. But this is super specific and thematic to the Marvel Universe. Tony Stark, Iron Man is trying to build Stark Tower and trying to take a certain sector thematic to him. Ultron is trying to kill Iron Man and trying to take over certain sectors, and Captain America wants to take over the Helicarrier, which thematically I guess is him getting S.H.I.E.L.D. back on his side. I don't know. Not everything makes total sense in this theme, but at least they made that effort. They made the effort to say, okay, here's what the characters' motivations are. Thor wants to find Loki's scepter, and that's a guessing game where Loki is like casting these illusions over the city. It's kind of a stretch, but it works. I mean, it is functionally thematic, and it's an interesting element to throw into the Risk mix, where it's not just like plop down the hugest, biggest army in one spot and just go on a rampage as much as you can. It's, okay, I don't really need to do that to win. I just need these specific spots, and I need to find this item. So let me just focus on that instead and see if I can get those other players to just take each other out and not worry too much about me, because Ultron's trying to kill Iron Man, Winter Soldier's trying to kill Captain America. Thor might just be able to run around the board unmolested if he can play his cards right. So that's very interesting to me. The whole thing with the Helicarrier, despite the fact that it's 3D for no reason, is also interesting in how the Winter Soldier can actually flip the S.H.I.E.L.D. soldiers to his side, and one of his allies can do essentially the same thing as well to any enemy unit. That's very, very cool to me. Now, the problem is, at the same time, this is still Risk. The core mechanics are still the same, and unfortunately, unlike Risk Legacy, there's no like cool legacy element to it to even pile onto that to make it more interesting. It's still very random. The combat is still very random. You can just do very poorly. Some of the objectives are very random, like especially Thor's. Like Thor could just like take over Asgard real quick, find the scepter real quick, end the game real quick. Or it's going to be in the very last place that he looks, and he has no chance of getting there and winning the game. That's very, very random, and that is the thing that has always killed Risk, and it still stays that way to a degree. But the fact that you have these extra bits, the objectives, the allies, which are a very interesting thing, all these different things can speed up the game, which again was a big problem with Risk. This mitigates that. I will say the components are also hit and miss. I like the idea that there's all this different plastic, and the Stark Tower looks cool, the Hulk miniature. But first off, Captain America's minis and the tokens, the Winter Soldiers, and to a degree Ultron's, when they're all out on the map, very, very hard to tell apart. Huge problem. It really is, because it's like, wait a minute. Especially when there's none of your big figures there, you always have to make sure that you do that in this game. Because it's like, wait a minute, there's 2 tokens alone. Those look dark. Is this black or is this dark blue? I can't tell. It's very frustrating and annoying. And also, the 3 figures, while I appreciate that they're there, they all look like these really bad sculpts. It's like muddy masses of plastic. At least the Captain America one, you can tell because he's got a shield. The Winter Soldier just looks like, oh, my face is melted off. So that's a weird thing. So the components are hit and miss. So where do I stand on this whole box as a whole? It's tough to say. As Risk rethemes go, it's a solid one. I still think there's way better games. Play Kemet. For the love of God, play Kemet. But if you got this game as a gift, if you're deciding whether to open it or not, or if you're deciding whether to get someone who's addicted to the Marvel Universe and hasn't really played a lot of these more complicated games, I'm happy that this game exists because it feels like more of a gamerly game than Risk has ever felt like before. So it's hard to be too upset with any of its faults. It's still an interesting game. Even the Guardians of the Galaxy side, I don't personally like the game that it's based on, or this version of it either. But it's not terrible. It's okay. So as a whole package, getting them both in the same box, that kind of elevates it another step forward. So I'm not keeping the game, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it over many other games that I have, but certainly if you're into the theme a lot, and if you even like Risk for the most part, and just want a better version of it, check it out. I was surprised by how much cool stuff they put into it, even with its faults. And maybe you do like Age of War and just love the idea of looking at the Guardians of the Galaxy and ogling them seductively. Whatever you want to do, it's none of my business. Go for it. You could do much worse for games that have the name Risk on the box. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.